Hello again, everyone, and welcome to a slightly different edition of Woodpeckers Deep Dive. My name is Jeff Ferris. This is Adam Bajorian. He's our amazing videographer and film editor. And this is the first of a 4-part series on how to build this side table. And we designed the table to go along with the chairs we brought you at the beginning of the summer. And we divided the build into 4 segments to make it a little easier to follow. Each segment goes over a different aspect of the build, and in each one, we'll share some tips and tricks for using Woodpecker's tools.
Now, when we launched the Taper Sled back in July, Jeff told everyone that he wanted to build this bistro table to showcase some of the other uses of the Taper Sled besides just table legs. But I know he really just wanted a place where he and his wife could sit and have lunch outside.
Hey now. Don't share everything.
Either way, everyone loves the radial wedge slats of the table and the hub in the middle. I call it Jeff's sunshine table.
Now, the technique for figuring out the wedges is scalable. You can build any size table from this little side table up to one big enough for a full family and guests. A little later in the episode, I'll go over the geometry involved to figure out the size of the wedge for the given size table you want to build. Now, while the width of the wedge is going to change, the angle is always 15 degrees. And I'll show you how to set that angle on our taper sled.
The legs are scalable too. You can make them any height, from coffee table to a stand-up cocktail table. We'll look at setting up the taper sled to taper the legs using start and stop points instead of a specific angle. Even if you're not a fan of this design, there's a lot to learn about using the taper sled in this video and lots of tips and techniques in the complete series.
Now, Adam and I built this when we could steal a few minutes away from doing product videos. It's taken us a few weeks, so let's rewind the clock back to when we started and we'll show you exactly how we did it. The tabletop is basically a 24-slice pizza. Each slice is a 15-degree wedge. If you take the wedges to a sharp point and space them out, the points will be very vulnerable to chipping. Instead, we're going to trim the tips off and put a hub in the center. If we do a little geometry, we find that the circumference of a 4-inch circle is just over 12.5 inches. Now, if we divide that by 24, we get 0.524 inches. Split that in half, and we have a little over 1/4 inch for each of the ends of the wedges, and a little over 1/4 inch for the space between the wedges. That leaves us just enough room to put a 4-inch plug in the center. Now, for the wide end of the wedge, we're going to use the same formula. For this table, we want the diameter to be 26 inches. 26 times pi, or 3.1416, is 81.68 inches of circumference. 24 1/4-inch spaces takes 6 inches off that, for 75.68 inches. Divide by 24 wedges, and we have a wide end measurement of 3.153. Now, we wanted the space between the wedges to be a little over 1/4 inch, so we're going to round down to 3.125 or 3 1/8. To build your table to a dimension other than 26 inches, I still suggest you stick with the 4-inch hub. That 1/4 inch tip and 1/4 inch space between the wedges is just too convenient to mess with. Just plug your outside diameter into the formula we just went through. Okay, next we set up the taper sled. When I built the bistro table for the office, I cut a 15-degree angle on one side and a 7.5-degree angle on the other. That's the method that you would typically use cutting a 4-sided tapered leg. It works great, but there's quite a bit of waste when you're making these wedges. We went a different direction on the side table, and it saved a lot of material. It's actually the same angle cuts, except you're taking that 7.5-degree cut off the end instead of off the side. That lets us get 2 wedges out of one board that's just a little bit wider than the end of the wedges. Just need to account for a couple of saw curves. We need the width of the board to be a 1/2 inch wider than the wedge base. So in this case, 3 5/8 of an inch. And we also need it an inch or so longer than the finished wedge. So our 26-inch table with a 4-inch hub, we need 11 inches. Add an inch to that, you get 12. I milled all the stock in 28-inch lengths so I could deal with any planer snipe or end checks. I jointed one edge, and now I'll cut 12 boards square on both ends, 12 inches long. Then we'll move over to the table saw and rip them to 3 5/8. Now it's time to cut the 15-degree angle on all 24 wedges. We've already done enough geometry to give me a headache, so we're going to cheat a little bit. We put a link in the description to a math calculator that comes in handy with the taper sled. The scales on the taper sled are placed exactly 24 inches apart. That gives us a very accurate way to set angles. We can set any angle with a rise and run setting. And we can get that rise and run setting with some algebra. Or we can cheat with the calculator in the link. Just plug in the angle that we want and the 24-inch run. 15 degrees with 24 inches of run takes 6 7/16 inch of rise. So on the sled, I'll set the forward scale to 1 inch and the rear scale to 7 7/16. Now I'll clamp the board to the sled, showing about an 1/8 inch flat spot on the narrow end. And I'll bring a square stop to the wide end. Now I'll cut the 12 boards into the 24 wedges that I need. To be honest, that's not quite right. I'm lying. I'm going to make a couple extras. I know I'm going to have to make some test cuts, and I'm bound to mess something up somewhere along the way. So I've got some extras just in case I need to fill in. While the taper sled is on the saw, I'll cut the taper into the legs. I want the taper to start about a 1/4 inch below the apron and angle toward the end of the leg, finishing with a foot about 1 5/8 of an inch. Now I have no idea what that angle is, and honestly, I don't care. I'm just going to line up my start and stop points and lock the fence. I want the outside of the leg vertical, so I'm only tapering the inside edges of the legs. Okay, clamp them in and make the cuts.
All right, in the next episode, we'll move over to the miter saw and we'll finish the wedges. Then we'll make the hub for the center of the table, do a dry assembly, and take a look at how to perfect the spacing of the wedges. There's a bunch of cool techniques coming up, so be sure to watch.
Looking forward to getting into that. If you enjoyed the show today, be sure and give us a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, be sure and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you'll always know when our next video is coming up. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time on Woodpeckers Deep Dive.